To everyone on this side of Atlantic, to everyone over where my guest is, good afternoon.
Hi, everyone.
We have with 1 hour per student. We're going to be talking about what it means to work in education and comics, and really delve into what it's like to do these sorts of educational, philosophical, moral comics. Not just here on Kickstarter, but beyond. So if you have any questions, sort of thing that people should definitely be checking. Amazing person. Make sure you make sure you hit the comment button, share it, and tell everyone about it, because the Great Commandment, we only have a couple of weeks left, and every pair of eyes that we can get on this is greatly appreciated. So let's delve right into what the Great Commandment is. This is a comics anthology that, like we mentioned before, has just a couple of weeks left on Kickstarter. Comics over 170 pages, asking what commands are, what they mean, what they could mean, and even what they should mean. So what do we commands are an aspect of life, from the highbrow and extraordinarily meaningful the 10 Commandments. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. You must love the Lord your God, to the Magna Carta and the preamble to the Constitution. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. There are also considerably more common commands that we experience every day, from please, it is your turn to do the dishes. Make sure you actually pick up that prescription today, to because I said so. That is very much a commonly held command. To the lowbrow but perfectly heartfelt and loving commands, like live long and prosper and be excellent to each other. But just as important as those commands are, so too is our response. Yeah, but what does it all mean? What does it mean to follow the gospel and understandings of Judaism and Christianity? What does it mean to be an upright citizen of the United States or the United Kingdom? What does it mean to actually try and live out the education, have a good education, or to give one? And in that one, we have a brilliant artist and writer talking about her own works, as well as her contribution to the Great Commandment Comics Anthology, 1 hour per student. Alex Lewis, so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the very big introduction. I think you possibly built me up too much, but it's appreciated.
Excellent. Alex, can you talk a little bit about your own body of work, and then 1 hour per student in particular?
Sure. So I'm Alex. I'm Alex Makes Comics. So you can find me at alexmakescomics.com and as Alex Makes Comics on Instagram and Twitter. So I'm just Alex Makes Comics everywhere. That because my actual name is Alex Lewis, which is, I think, 2 of the most common first names and last names. So Alex Makes Comics is just much easier to search and find. Most of my comics are things that I write and illustrate for myself and then upload directly onto my website. Generally, they tend to deal with human experience, particularly relationships, loneliness, isolation, insanity, that kind of thing. And the Great Commandment story that I've done for this anthology, which is called 1 Hour Per Student, is quite a novel departure for me, because rather than focusing on the emotional experiences of my life, it focuses more on work and work side of, of things, because in my day job I'm a lecturer, and so the story that I wrote for this anthology is called 1 Hour Per Student, and it's about how to work to that requirement. But generally, I think the comics that I'm known most for, I've got a comic called Betrayal up on my website, and that's about kind of a friendship between three kids who grow up together, but then fall apart through as their emotions mature and as they kind of start to explore their romantic interests in each other, and kind of, yeah, loosely based on my own childhood, obviously. But then I also have comics that are more sci-fi and fantasy. I'm currently working on a horror graphic novel called Sometimes I Feel Like I'm Falling, which also takes place in space, like the story that I've done for The Great Commandment. And Sometimes I Feel Like I'm Falling is about an astronaut who is working in orbit of the planet Neptune on the Vostok station, but all of her crew have died in accidents, and her therapist is insisting that they've died in accidents. But all of a sudden, she starts seeing the ghost of her ex-girlfriend everywhere in the station, and she becomes convinced that this is Neptune manifesting itself to kill her and destroy the station. So you kind of supposed to read the book and not really know if it's Neptune killing the crew for overreaching, or if it's the ghost of the main character's girlfriend tormenting her for trying to leave a toxic romantic relationship.
Fascinating. And you can totally check out in the comments below Alex's work with Alex Makes Comics. 1 hour per student, you really constraints and really the sort of confinement that you see. You see this a lot also in middle and high schools here in the United States, and I don't know the precise name for it in England, but it's trying to figure out how best to maximize all the very limited amount of time you have with how many students that you have to teach, right?
Yeah, I think globally it's a symptom of the commodification of education, that basically there are various different philosophies of education and theories of education, why we educate people. I think intuitively at its core, education should be something that empowers individuals to pursue the goals that they want to pursue in life. But throughout time, we've shifted in education from it being a philosophy around self-improvement to it being a service through which people invest time and money so that they can get a financial output at the end of it. So whereas before we might have education systems that were quite individualistic and quite centered around the learner, today sometimes what we're seeing in a lot of countries and a lot of different societies is a trend towards schools and universities being pressured to ensure that students pass exams so that they can become more employable, or so that they can pursue more education in future. And so it kind of really distills the education process to bits of paper that we show to validate that we have completed the required amount of time within an institution, and that this piece of paper now qualifies us to do a particular job, to pursue a career path. And I think that as that's happened, governments and parents and societies have recognized that, oh, if we invest in education, we might be able to grow the economy, and so it's a worthwhile thing. But the pressure on institutions to show that impact is also growing. And as that commodification of education, the turning of education into a commodity has happened within societies, everything is becoming a numerical value, and that includes kind of the teacher-student relationship. And we try to boil that down to how much time can each student be allocated to spend with a teacher or with a member of staff on their own problems. And of course, we can't really distill that amount of time in any meaningful way, because students are individuals and teachers are individuals and lecturers are individuals, and individuals have different needs and also different capacities to respond to needs. And especially in the aftermath of the global pandemic that we're living in now, what we've seen is just an unprecedented rise in student needs and situations that can't necessarily be solved in 5 minutes. So the examples that I can give you from my own work are students who've lost their work because of COVID and are therefore no longer able to pay their tuition. How do you solve the problem in an hour? To students who are out on fieldwork in a different country, and but now because of COVID, they're stranded there and they don't have the finances to pay their hotel, and all the flights are cancelled, they're closed, and what do you do? How do you get them out? How do you solve that in an hour? To students who are facing loss, personal loss of relatives, or they are sick, or they are isolated, they suddenly have to look after their children or look after elderly relatives while they do their work and are unable to cope with their assignments alongside that. So how do we kind of cram that into an hour's worth of interaction per student? So I thought that was kind of an interesting historical moment and an interesting crisis generally. And I've decided to tell that story through the metaphor of a lecturer sitting in a bubble of air on the moon, who only has so much oxygen to allocate per student, and has to choose between their own health and the health of the people that they're serving.
Absolutely. And what you also did that was very well done, that was needed, is the educator in 1 hour per student is actually trying to maximize as much of their time to the student, which is both really great, and it doesn't always happen. Here in the United States, we talk also a lot about we're not preparing kids to learn, we're teaching like throughout from 4th grade all the way up through senior year of high school. So 8 years of my own curriculum, you had about at least a month where at least one subject was going to be nationally or state tested wide. So the teacher's response then was, okay, I need to focus on what I can do to get you this level of points, because if you don't, then I am going to also face repercussions, and might not pass, even though I know you know the material. It's what you talked about there is trying to figure out, how do you quantify learning? How are you able to show almost a robotic level of a learning curve? Someone who just gradually keeps going, and we can track on a perfect inline curve of, and they are going to know their multiplication tables by this week, and they're going to understand long division, and over here, they're going to completely understand every aspect of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. And what you struck on in 1 hour per student is, but we're not robots. We're not able to just immediately get everything, either because the lecturer or the teacher just isn't perfectly able to entirety of a book down into a single hour that people can just perfectly understand, nor can the students just all get everything out. And the word that you used of commodifying education, we have this major discussion constantly of what is a public school education designed to do? Is it designed to make people grow as human beings in our society? Is it supposed to just prepare them for a new job? Or is it supposed to prepare them for an undergrad degree and entry? And you seem to also be asking this question of, why isn't it that first one of just figuring out how this person is a solid member of society?
Yeah, that's probably my own research and academic background coming through. I think it probably helps for people to understand that I work in an education department, and so I actually specialize in education and international development, and particularly I focus on education in war-affected societies and how to rebuild schools after the war. So it's kind of contexts like Afghanistan, Somalia, and so on and so forth. And as part of a lot of our research, there have been theories and philosophies of education that have all been around recentering education around the learner, and there are various advantages for doing that. So when we don't do that, we call that banking education. So it's basically the idea that the student is a bank, and the role of the teacher is to deposit the curriculum in the student's brain, and then the student has to prove that they have the transfer has been done correctly by passing an exam in which they reproduce the curriculum that they have been given. But really, what contemporary philosophies of education show is that students aren't blank slates. You know, they come, and the classroom is not the only place that learning takes place. But really are granted. They're given within current education theory and philosophy that even if we have a perfect education system that is designed to transfer the curriculum in a perfect way to the student's own identity and experience and their previous knowledge and understanding will shape the way they interpret and understand that curriculum. And it will generate various strengths and weaknesses for them, basically, that a good education system should capitalize on, and that a good education system should respond to, basically. So the idea that students are not blank slates to write on for teachers has gained increasing popularity around the world. Where obviously we still have authoritarian societies in which it's very much about indoctrination, and that's a different debate for another day. But the idea that not as widespread, but is one that I toy with in my academic research, is the idea that teachers are also not empty conduits through which to transfer the curriculum. So while we have started to think about the role of the student in shaping and determining learning outcomes, what we talk about less often is how a teacher's own experiences, biases, knowledge, and so on and so forth shape and warp a curriculum once in that transfer process. So So I'm very interested in kind of thinking about teachers as individuals. And as individuals, teachers have all sorts of different constraints on, they have ethical constraints on in terms of how what they're able to teach and not teach. They have constraints in terms of curriculum and pedagogical constraints. What are the policies and programs and frameworks within institutional frameworks within which they have to deliver a curriculum, and what rules do they have to work under to do that? They have personal constraints, because no matter how good a teacher you are, you might be working on a day when your child is sick, or you might be working on a day when you just had an altercation in your car with another driver on your way into work. You might have an elderly relative who you're thinking about, and so all of this shapes your ability to work and perform in the space. And then to bring it back to 1 hour per student, the problem is two-sided, right? When we try to distill this interaction between the student and the teacher to a specific allocation of time, what we're not necessarily taking into account is that the student is an individual, but also we're not taking into account that the lecturer and the teacher is an individual with individual needs, and that particularly at most teachers go into they want to help. However manipulative and exploitative, and I know some teachers are terrible human beings and terrible, but at their core, most people want to go into teaching because they want to work with students and they want to help, even if their vision of helping is not always going to have a positive development outcome. But so because of that, we're much more likely to dip into our own personal time to give extra time to the students, and then that eats away at other parts of your life. And so that's kind of what 1 hour per student as a story is calling attention to. That's a very long rambling answer. I apologize.
It was not rambling at all, because you were delving right into something that very much people recognize but don't actually reckon with, of the individuality of teachers. So in American public education is close to something like 26. Do an hour per student would be 27 hours out of your work week. That's more than half your week. That's closing in on almost. What you're also very much talking about is an hour is not enough anyways, because we keep talking about distillation. I love that you use the word distillation. Let's figure out ways to simplify all to very easy, because I want an easy solution as to why my student is getting a C- instead of the B+ that I know that he or she can do. And here in the States, we very much want to be like, okay, good teacher, bad teacher, because this one's a good teacher because he was able to get all of his students' test scores up. Students seem to like him, and then you track it, and once they leave his class, suddenly everyone's grades drop significantly. And it's trying to figure out that education is probably the most complicated field that we think of. We can trying to translate some of the biggest and most important ideas on the planet growing up, and to a time, but for dozens of people constantly for a range of subjects. What is the solution, Alex, besides maybe I don't know, trimming class sizes down from 26 all the way down to like 6, which would require hiring a lot of teachers.
I love that you're talking about class sizes of 26 and I'm working in class sizes of 112. um, so
Yeah.
yeah, it's a slightly different scale. But it's 112 grown-ups versus 26 children, which is always a different area to to work in. But I don't necessarily think that there's a direct solution, but I think that part of the problem is that the role of the teacher and the role of the lecturer is changing in society. And so, particularly as our understandings of childhood and learning are becoming more and more sophisticated with time. So if you think that teachers used to simply be responsible for delivering the curriculum, right? But now, in a lot of cases, teachers are also in charge of administering school lunches. They're in charge of making sure that kids aren't being abused at home quite often. They're in charge of providing and access to social services and support. In the UK, disgustingly, a lot of responsible for monitoring the security in a country as well by reporting to police if they think that students are exhibiting suspicious behavior. And the role of lecturers is increasing along similar means, particularly as we see that for example, there's a massive mental health crisis in academia generally around the world, and I can speak with more knowledge around the UK that we have a very high rate of people taking their own lives, and that rate of deaths seems to increase the longer you spend in education. And I shouldn't laugh, but and so it's also very visible around people who teach in higher education. Are also more susceptible to these things. So mental health of staff and students has become policy focus for many governments and has become a policy focus for many universities. So that means that kind of university staff are now not only supposed to take this, but also supposed to provide a point of contact for their well-being, checking in to see if they have any mental health or physical health issues that are impeding their ability to study. Then they're supposed to do quite a lot of administration that they didn't used to have to do in the past, particularly as our administrative kind of support sector is shrinking in universities across the world as universities try to save more money. And so more and more of administrative roles running undergraduate and postgraduate education are falling on university staff. So I think that the problem seems to be that we are expecting the educators within our society to do more and more as they have more and more students. And that's kind of the tension that we're seeing come into play. That's why so many educators around the world are burning out or are quitting and are leaving to work in other sectors. It's not only that the student numbers are increasing, but also that the diversity of their responsibilities is increasing without being taken into account into the central time management and time allocation systems, if that makes sense. So I guess the solution would be to invest more in administration and also to invest more in kind of skilled positions that students can go to as a first point of contact. So at my university, we have, for example, we have tutors. So a personal tutor is somebody who you can go to with any issue or concern that you have, either about your personal well-being or about your academic development progression. You can approach them throughout the course. Now, normally the personal tutor role is simply allocated from the existing teaching staff on the program that you're studying. So there's no kind of specialist training or expertise required for that role. And the member of staff is given kind of a list of services to refer the student towards, so, oh, this seems like a mental health issue, talk to the mental health services. This seems like an accommodation issue, talk to the accommodation service, or this is a finance issue, so talk to them. But, you still have to hear out the student. When we're talking about the possible solution, and what we would like to implement is we would like to make that a specialist role where we appoint people solely personal tutors within the university so that they only do that. So that once takes the pressures off of the teaching staff to have to fulfill that role. It also gives students more support because the role then becomes a technical role as opposed to just kind of administrative role. So those are kind of the solutions that we're exploring. But of course, all of these solutions cost money, particularly now in the aftermath of the pandemic. So many universities are facing and just an uncertain financial future. So everybody's implemented hiring freezes. Nobody really wants to think about expending more resources right now. So probably we're going to see, we've already seen as a result of the pandemic that the roles of educators have expanded again. So for example, at my university, we make sure that if you're teaching online in an online session, if you were teaching a lecture face-to-face, you would have one member of staff in the room delivering a lecture. But now teaching in an online setting, we're like, no, you have to have at least two, but we recommend 3 people online. So 2 teaching so that you kind of maintain interest in that online conversation, and 1 person running a chat with students. So, but we're not given that extra time to do that. That's just what everybody's been volunteering to do on our modules, but basically means that everybody's doing 3 times as much teaching as they would have been doing last year. So it's kind of just increasing.
Yeah, on top of the myriad things that you're describing, count off some of the full-time jobs that you're expert in your field. You have to be actually good at public speaking, especially if you're lecturing. You need to have enough of a background in mental health to be able to spot and on mental health issues and warning signs. On top of all of that, administrative, and here in the United States, also protector in case of gun violence or different kinds of violence. We also now, in the pandemic, are adding, you need to be an expert in Zoom. You need to be an expert in all sorts of technological advances so you can actually keep up. And you have to be able to take note of mental health issues over the internet. With your students, you have to be able to take social cues with that. Or the school could say, just take your life into your own hands and crowded built with people from all over the states with and
Sorry, Jack, I think I've lost you. Like, I lost the last half of that.
It's insane. So I think we are in a bit of technical difficulties we have here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry. So I heard until, yeah, I think it was like the last minute of that cut out.
No. Uh, so what we're really talking about here between Alex and I is a need for more. When I actually got my teaching license in in Massachusetts, and I went up to my old high school. I had a 4-year degree in literature. I had a minor in education. I had a teaching certificate, and their response was, "Okay, so you're going to be making uh, five, low to mid five figures, but we can't hire you also because you don't have a master's in your field. More money elsewhere, and you want me to get another 3-year degree." And that's exactly what Alex is talking about. The burnout rate for teachers is immense because put on each and every one of these hats having to fight for it's not the most important thing, but it's pretty important. Money. The amount of teachers that who have to commute over an hour to is mind-boggling. Is that similar in the UK, Alex?
Sure. I mean, I have to I have to commute 2.5 hours to my work. But fortunately, I'm teaching online now, so my commute is now 0 hours. Um, no, I think it's interesting because it's as our societal as the value that we place on education as a society has increased, the value that on teachers and educators seems to have decreased, and it's an improportional kind of equation, which I've never really understood. But as more and more governments and individuals have come to that, oh, the longer that I spend in education, the more that my personal earning potential might increase. And as governments have understood, the more money that we spend on the education sector, the more specialized our workforce will become, and the more that our economy will grow. So there's this clear kind of formulation where education has a monetary output that individuals, governments, societies value. And because of that, the demand is continuously increasing. But we're not willing to increase the spending on individuals and teachers. And as you say, all that means is that it creates greater numbers of students for educators to support and deal with, which without easing the pressure elsewhere is going to lead to greater burnout. And the genuine danger is that it takes quite a long time to train a teacher, and it takes a long time to train an educator. And if we keep losing that workforce, we might start losing it at a faster rate than we can replenish it. And as the demand for education continues to increase and increase, and particularly at the higher education, while the resources seem to be reducing and the space and the constraints, the space seems to be reducing while the constraints seem to be increasing. Um, it, it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy where you can have less teaching staff per student, more pressure, more burnout, more people leaving, less teachers, more students, and so on and so forth in this vicious cycle.
Exactly. So this an absolute rainbows and puppies all around. But it's the kind of thing that we actually want to be talking about in comics, especially with comics. Most everyone that has been a part of this field has, we're trying to talk about things that really matter to us personally. So we have reached what I call the QVC portion of this, because we are on Kickstarter very much. We do need funding to continue to actually do these sort of things that we are doing. Try selling Flumix to the world. But that is what is going on right now. If you like what Alex is doing, if you go over and click her link over there, you can see it down below, alexmakescomics.com. If you like this and you want to support Alex's work and maybe even mine, go over to the Great Commandment on Kickstarter right now. You can get the book. You can get the deluxe version with added content. You can get our first anthology, Why Faith, which is also available on there, as well as a ton of art. So this is what we've been talking about also, is the complicated nature of education. What do you want people to take from 1 hour per student, or the Great Commandment, or this talk in general?
That's a really difficult question. I hope, I mean, I know that what I really enjoyed from reading other stories in the Great Commandment, particularly from reading your story, Jack, was that when I read your story, it went in a direction that I wasn't expecting it to go in. And after I finished reading it, I had to pause and take a quiet moment and think before I could move on with my life. And I hope that that's an experience that readers get generally with the stories. It's not necessarily that I want people to read 1 hour per student and then immediately go out and petition their governments to change the way that they pay teachers, so on and so forth, or the way that they value, because we get paid enough, we get paid okay at the academic, higher education level, not at the primary and secondary level, but we don't get enough. So that's the major issue. So it's not that I'm kind of petitioning for people to radical changes or to become political activists, but I hope that they read the story and then stop and pause and think about the world that we're going towards. Because ultimately, education. I had a student once who came to me. This was years and years ago, and they said, "I'm quite sure that I'm thinking about writing my final dissertation on education, but I don't know. I was thinking maybe I could have done something more political." And I would respond by saying there's absolutely nothing more political than education, because ultimately education shapes the next generation, it shapes the future, right? So it's through education that parents and governments decide on the world that they want our children to live in. So it is a massively political issue, and we expect a huge amount from the sector. So I hope that people who the story are compelled to pause and think about that, and to think about kind of, if we expect so much from the education sector, what does that mean for educators in general, and the duties and responsibilities that we're creating for them. That was definitely a rambling answer.
But it strikes very much at the core of the Great Commandment and my other anthology, Why Faith. It is what we're seeking right now, is to be able to talk and have conversations about these issues Alex and I are not coming out here saying, look, I have the solution, and what you really need to do is you need to give me $100,000 and I will go out and fix education for this particular.
No, you should give me $100,000 though. Can I change my answer to say I want people to read the story and think $100,000? That would be good.
Great. I would love $100,000 because I would produce a ton of comics like this. I would bankroll many of Alex's projects, the creators that are involved in this, because we're talking about these bigger issues. We are trying to help find solutions by 1 hour per student strikes a chord because it is very much saying, here's what's going on, here's what's wrong. And I'm not giving you a solution, but I am definitely diagnosing a problem. In Knock Knock, I can't give you an answer because it's talking about a major tragedy, but I can at least get us to start talking about it. If you have actually been feeling like that, if you want to have conversations with people in and around your social circle and you're trying to figure out a better way to do it, share a comic book that brings these issues to life. It is much easier than interrupting Thanksgiving dinner and saying it's time for me to get up on my soapbox. But instead, let's talk about the political themes of Game of Thrones and ignore the last season. That is so much easier to jump in to complicated issues. What I did for my church that was a lot easier to talk about major issues is I had Scotch and God talk. I had people over at my house. We let alcohol flow a little bit more freely and literally just had a wonderful evening together where everyone realized, let's just talk. Minds change some. What are you going to be converted to the educational, go out and get your education degree? By you may, but more importantly, you're going to be thinking about it. All right. Final thoughts, Alex. Anything that you would love to add?
No, I mean, I think that's such a positive place to end. Go out, buy comics, make comics, buy comics that reflect the debates that you want to see reflected or that you want to speak to people about. Don't see those issues being reflected in the comics that you're reading and buying, then make comics that reflect those issues. I think that's what the amazing versatility of Kickstarter has to offer us. It's a space that is inviting to the of voices and perspectives and cultures and identities, and it's really powerful that way. And involve with other creators and share your ideas, because that's where progress comes from. Progress comes from communication first, and yeah.
Alex, for being a part of this. Thank you, dear watchers, for watching. I hope you enjoy. I hope you get the Great Commandment. Believe this is the last week. We will be joining up once again on November 2nd for another round of interviews. So check us out. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a great Halloween weekend. If you're in the United States, go vote. Please go vote. And Thank you once again to Alex. And